All right, let's go.
Number 10. What alive actually means. The checklist biology uses and why it's less airtight than it sounds. Before asking whether the universe could be alive, it helps to know what biologists actually mean when they call something alive in the first place, because the honest answer is that there is no single universally agreed definition. Instead, biology typically works from a checklist of characteristics: metabolism, the ability to take in energy and convert it into usable forms; homeostasis, the ability to maintain stable internal conditions despite a changing external environment; growth and organization, building increasingly complex structure over time; response to stimuli; and reproduction, the ability to produce new entities carrying forward some version of the parent structure or information. No single item on that list is considered sufficient on its own, and biologists have long acknowledged edge cases that blur the boundary. Viruses, for instance, cannot metabolize or reproduce independently outside a host cell, which is precisely why their status as alive remains genuinely debated within biology itself rather than settled. Fire consumes fuel, grows, and spreads, satisfying some criteria on the list, while obviously failing others. The checklist was built to describe biological life on Earth specifically, using processes rooted in carbon chemistry, cellular structure, and DNA. Every idea on this list about the universe as a whole is, in some sense, an attempt to ask whether the underlying pattern behind that checklist, rather than the specific carbon-based chemistry, might show up again at a radically larger scale. Number 9. The cosmic web looks like a brain. A 2020 study that measured the resemblance directly. In November 2020, astrophysicist Franco Vazza of the University of Bologna and neurosurgeon Alberto Faletti of the University of Verona published a paper in the journal Frontiers in Physics comparing two of the most structurally complex systems known to science: the network of neurons inside the human brain, and the cosmic web, the enormous filamentary network of galaxies and dark matter that makes up the observable universe's large-scale structure. Their motivation was not poetic. It was a direct quantitative comparison using density power spectrum analysis, a technique originally developed in cosmology to study how galaxies are distributed in space. What they found was a genuinely striking, measurable resemblance. The human brain contains an estimated 69 billion neurons. The observable universe contains an estimated 100 billion galaxies. Vazza and Faletti found that the pattern of density fluctuations inside the cerebellum's neuronal network, measured across a scale of roughly 1 micrometer to 1/10 of a millimeter, followed strikingly similar statistical progression to the distribution of matter across the cosmic web, measured across a scale of roughly 5 million to 500 million light-years, a difference of more than 27 orders of magnitude in scale. They also compared structural network properties, the average number of connections per node, and the tendency for connections to cluster around a smaller number of highly connected hub nodes. Both networks showed unexpectedly similar values on these measures, closer to each other than either network was to a single galaxy on its own, or the internal structure of a single neuron on its own. The researchers were explicit that their method approximated neural connectivity using simple spatial proximity rather than true synaptic wiring, and they stopped well short of claiming the universe is literally a brain. Their own stated conclusion was more measured, that two entirely different physical processes, gravity shaping galaxies and biochemistry shaping neurons, appeared to be building structures that land on remarkably similar levels of complexity and self-organization, hinting that some deeper, shared organizing principle might be doing similar work across radically different scales and materials. Number 8. Self-organization and dissipative structures. The physics explaining why complex order keeps appearing at all. The Vazza and Faletti result connects to a much older and better established body of physics, the study of how organized structure spontaneously emerges from disorder. In the 1960s and 70s, Belgian physical chemist Ilya Prigogine developed a framework called dissipative structure theory, describing systems that maintain organized, ordered patterns, specifically by remaining far from thermodynamic equilibrium, continuously taking in energy from their surroundings and exporting entropy back out. Prigogine received the 1977 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for this work, and the concept applies to phenomena ranging from convection cells forming in a heated pan of oil to chemical reactions that spontaneously organize into repeating spatial and temporal patterns, to biological organisms themselves. The defining insight is that order and disorder are not simply opposites competing for dominance across the universe. Under the right, far from thermodynamic equilibrium conditions, the flow of energy through an open system, one that continuously exchanges matter and energy with its surroundings, actively drives the formation of complex, self-organizing structure rather than merely tolerating it. Living organisms are, under this framework, one specific and highly sophisticated example of a dissipative structure, but not necessarily a unique one or special one. Stars form and organize themselves this way, converting gravitational and nuclear energy into structured output while radiating entropy into the surrounding cold of space. Galaxies and the cosmic web itself form through gravitational collapse and merger processes that similarly move energy through the system while building increasingly organized large-scale structure over cosmic time. None of this is controversial physics. Dissipative structure theory is well-established, experimentally verified, and taught in physical chemistry and complex systems courses. What remains genuinely open is how far the underlying principle extends and whether the universe's own large-scale structure formation and even its long-term evolution from a hot, dense, relatively featureless early state towards its current staggeringly complex arrangement of galaxies, stars, and life qualifies as the same basic organizing phenomenon operating at cosmic scale. Number 7. Does the universe have a metabolism? Stars, entropy, and the cosmos as an energy processing system. If dissipative structure theory is taken seriously as a scale-independent principle, the next natural question is whether the universe as a whole performs anything resembling a metabolism, taking in usable energy, doing organizational work with it, and exporting waste entropy, the same basic pattern every living organism performs on a cellular level. At the largest observable scale, this pattern does appear to hold, at least loosely. Stars function as enormous self-sustaining fusion engines, converting the gravitational potential energy of collapsing hydrogen clouds into structured nuclear output, radiating both usable energy and entropy outward into the surrounding emptiness of space for billions of years at a stretch, a process that is, structurally, not unlike an extremely slow, extremely large-scale version of cellular respiration, converting stored chemical energy into usable output plus waste heat. Over cosmic history, the universe has moved from an early, extremely hot, nearly featureless state toward a current state containing galaxies, stars, planets, and in at least one confirmed location, biological life, a trajectory of increasing local organization purchased as thermodynamics demands at the cost of ever-increasing total entropy in the wider universe, precisely the same trade-off every biological organism makes throughout its own lifetime. Cosmologists studying the universe's long-term thermodynamic future describe an eventual state called heat death in which usable energy gradients are fully exhausted and no further organized structure or activity remains possible, a cosmic endpoint that maps, at least metaphorically, onto the eventual thermodynamic death of every dissipative structure, biological or otherwise, ultimately experiences once its energy source is exhausted. None of this proves the universe is metabolizing in any biologically meaningful sense, but the structural parallel, an open system processing energy, building organized complexity, exporting entropy, and eventually running down once its energy gradient is spent, holds up as more than a loose poetic comparison. It follows directly from applying the same well-established thermodynamic principles that describe biological metabolism to the universe considered as a single physical system. Number 6. Cosmological natural selection. Lee Smolin's theory that the universe reproduces. In 1992, theoretical physicist Lee Smolin proposed one of the most genuinely startling ideas in modern cosmology, later expanded in his 1997 book, The Life of the Cosmos. Smolin's hypothesis, called cosmological natural selection, or the fecund universes theory, suggests that new universes are born inside black holes. Under this framework, rather than the singularity at a black hole center representing a true end where physics simply breaks down, quantum gravitational effects cause the collapsing matter to bounce, triggering the equivalent of a new Big Bang and generating an entirely new, causally disconnected universe on the other side, with physical constants slightly randomly mutated from the parent universe's own constants, the same way biological offspring inherit their parents' genetic code, with small random mutations. Smolin's central claim is that this process functions as a genuine mechanism of natural selection operating on cosmic scales. Universes whose physical constants happen to favor large numbers of black hole production will, by simple mathematical consequence, produce large numbers of black hole-generated offspring carrying similar constants forward, while universes with constants unfavorable to black hole formation will produce fewer or no offspring at all. Run this process across many generations of universes, and exactly as in biological evolution, the ensemble of existing universes should become dominated over cosmic scale time by universes whose fundamental constants are increasingly well-tuned toward efficient black hole production. Smolin has explicitly stated the theory is falsifiable and has repeatedly challenged physicists to disprove it, a stronger scientific commitment than many competing explanations for cosmic fine-tuning are willing to make. Number 5. Why most physicists remain skeptical of cosmological natural selection. The information paradox objection. Smolin's theory has faced serious, sustained technical criticism from within mainstream theoretical physics, and the most influential objection came from string theorist Leonard Susskind during a widely discussed 2004 public debate on the anthropic principle. Suskind's core criticism targets the specific mechanism Smolin's theory depends on: information transfer from a parent universe into a newly forming baby universe through a black hole's collapse. Susskind argued that decades of subsequent black hole physics research, including work reversing earlier assumptions about whether information is permanently destroyed inside black holes, has established that information falling into a black hole is not actually lost. It remains encoded in some highly scrambled form and is eventually released, in principle, as the black hole evaporates through Hawking radiation over immense timescales. If information cannot be destroyed and transferred into a genuinely separate offspring universe, the way Smolin's theory requires, then the entire reproductive mechanism the theory depends on becomes physically incoherent, regardless of how elegant the underlying evolutionary analogy sounds. Notably, even Stephen Hawking, who for decades was the most prominent physicist arguing that black holes do destroy information, eventually reversed his own long-held position on the matter, a shift that further undermines the specific physical mechanism Smolin's theory relies on. Cosmological natural selection also faces a more general problem shared by nearly every theory involving a broader multiverse of causally disconnected universes. Because these offspring universes are, by the theory's own definition, permanently causally disconnected from our own once formed, there is no direct observational way to confirm that any of them actually exist or that their physical constants actually mutated the way the theory predicts. Smolin's specific prediction that our universe's physical constants should be close to locally optimal for maximizing black hole production compared to nearby alternative constant values remains one of the few genuinely falsifiable claims to emerge from multiverse cosmology broadly, and it has not yet been definitively falsified, but it also has not been confirmed, and the specific reproductive mechanism it depends on runs directly against one of the best established recent results in black hole physics. Number 4. Panpsychism and integrated information theory, the idea that consciousness might be fundamental, not emergent. A separate thread entirely approaches the "is the universe alive?" question, not through structure or reproduction, but through consciousness itself. Panpsychism is the philosophical position defended in contemporary academic philosophy, most prominently by Philip Goff of Durham University, that consciousness is not something that emerges only in sufficiently complex brains, but is instead a fundamental, ubiquitous feature of physical reality itself, present in some extremely rudimentary form even at the level of individual particles, with complex consciousness, like human experience, arising only once enough of these fundamental units combine and organize in the right way. Neuroscientist Christoph Koch, working with Giulio Tononi, has developed a related, more formally mathematical framework called Integrated Information Theory, commonly abbreviated IIT, which proposes that consciousness corresponds directly to a measurable mathematical quantity denoted phi, representing the degree to which a system integrates information in a way that cannot be reduced to the sum of its separate parts. Critically, Koch and Tononi's own published formulation directly implies that any physical system generating a sufficiently high, locally maximal value of integrated information should, by the theory's own internal logic, be accompanied by some degree of genuine subjective experience, regardless of whether that system is a human brain, a simpler organism, or, in principle, some other sufficiently integrated physical structure entirely. Koch has directly stated in published academic exchanges that this consequence functions as a form of panpsychism and has argued, against critics like philosopher John Searle who call the implication absurd, that consciousness under IIT does not spread evenly like jam across everything, but rather concentrates specifically at local maxima of integration, meaning only genuinely tightly integrated systems would qualify, not arbitrary collections of matter. IIT remains a genuinely contested, actively debated framework within consciousness science, and it does not, on its own, make any direct claim about the universe as a single entity, but it establishes a scientifically serious, published foundation for the broader idea that consciousness might not require biological brains specifically, only a sufficient degree of physical integration, wherever that integration happens to occur.
Number 3. Cosmopsychism, Philip Goff's specific claim that the universe itself might be the one conscious subject. Panpsychism proposes that consciousness is fundamental and widely distributed across even very small physical constituents. Cosmopsychism, a related but distinct position that Philip Goff has also directly defended in published academic work, takes the opposite structural approach. Rather than building complex consciousness up from countless tiny conscious particles, Cosmopsychism proposes that the universe as a single unified whole is the one fundamental subject of consciousness, with individual human and animal minds representing partial, localized decompositions or restricted perspectives carved out of that single underlying cosmic consciousness, rather than separate conscious entities that combine to create something larger. Goff has argued that Cosmopsychism offers a more elegant solution than standard panpsychism to what philosophers call the combination problem, the difficult question of exactly how countless separate, fundamentally tiny units of proto-consciousness, each supposedly conscious in some minimal sense on its own, could combine together to produce the single, unified, coherent conscious experience an entire human being clearly has. If the universe's own unified consciousness is the fundamental starting point instead, and individual minds are partial restrictions or perspectives derived from that whole rather than sums built up from parts, the combination problem does not need to be solved from the bottom up at all. Goff has also connected this specific view to Russell in monism, a broader philosophical framework concerning the intrinsic, categorical nature underlying the purely relational, structural properties that physics is capable of describing, arguing that physics describes what matter does without ever telling us what matter intrinsically is, leaving room for that intrinsic nature to be fundamentally experiential. Cosmopsychism remains a minority position even among philosophers already sympathetic to panpsychism generally, and it carries no direct empirical test that distinguishes it from standard physicalism, but it represents the single most direct, formally developed philosophical claim on this entire list that the universe, considered as one unified whole, might quite literally be a conscious subject.
Number 2. Why most physicists reject this entirely. The standard model objection. Panpsychism and Cosmopsychism both face serious, direct pushback from working physicists, and the sharpest formulation of that objection has come from cosmologist Sean Carroll. Carroll's core argument is that panpsychism, by attributing some rudimentary form of consciousness or proto-experience directly to fundamental particles and fields, requires introducing an entirely new physical property into nature, one that does not appear anywhere within the standard model of particle physics, the extraordinarily well-tested framework describing every known fundamental particle and force. The standard model has been experimentally verified to extraordinary precision across decades of particle collider data, and Carroll's objection is that if particles genuinely possessed some fundamental proto-conscious property influencing their behavior, that property should, in principle, show up somewhere in the extremely precise experimental data physicists already have. Its complete absence from that data is treated as strong evidence against the idea, rather than a neutral gap simply waiting to be filled in later. Gough's response, published directly in exchanges collected in the 2021 volume Is Consciousness Everywhere, which included direct contributions and criticism from Carroll, Rovelli, Lee Smolin, and Christoph Koch, among others, has generally been to argue that panpsychism does not require any new causal force or physical interaction detectable through particle physics at all. It proposes an additional extrinsic, experiential nature to properties physics already fully describes structurally, rather than proposing a new physical force that ought to leave an experimental fingerprint. Whether that response is fully satisfying remains genuinely contested within academic philosophy of mind, and Carroll has stated plainly that he considers Gough's position to lack an adequate rebuttal to the standard model objection specifically. This is ultimately the central fault line running through this entire topic. Physics can rigorously demonstrate structural, mathematical similarities between the cosmic web and a brain, or between cosmic evolution and biological metabolism, without those structural parallels implying anything at all about subjective experience, awareness, or consciousness existing anywhere within the system being described. Number 1. Gaia, in the origin of this entire line of thinking. A smaller, more cautious version of the same idea applied to Earth first. Long before anyone seriously proposed the universe itself might be alive, chemist James Lovelock proposed something structurally similar but vastly more modest in scope about a single planet. Formulated around 1972 and expanded in his 1979 book, Gaia, A New Look at Life on Earth, working closely with microbiologist Lynn Margulis, Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis proposed that Earth's biosphere, atmosphere, oceans, and soil interact as a single self-regulating system, actively maintaining planetary conditions, temperature, atmospheric chemical composition, ocean salinity, within a narrow range consistently favorable to life, through the same kind of negative feedback loops that maintain homeostasis inside an individual living organism's body. Lovelock's strongest formulation, describing Earth outright as a single living superorganism, remains genuinely controversial and is treated with real skepticism by much of the scientific community. Critics have consistently argued the hypothesis risks smuggling in an unwarranted, quasi-teleological sense of planetary purpose or intention, treating something that could plausibly result from ordinary, undirected feedback processes as though it were deliberate self-regulation in a stronger biological sense. A weaker, considerably more widely accepted version of Gaia theory, sometimes distinguished as focusing specifically on the demonstrated fact that biological life measurably alters and stabilizes planetary conditions without necessarily requiring the entire system to count as a single unified organism in the strict biological sense, has proven far more useful and durable within mainstream Earth system science. What makes Gaia genuinely relevant to this entire topic is the sheer scale of the conceptual leap required to go from it to any claim about the universe as a whole. Gaia, even in its boldest original form, only ever proposed self-regulating, life-favoring feedback confined to a single planet's surface, driven by biological organisms that unambiguously already qualify as alive under every standard criterion. Every idea on this list attempting to extend a similar framework to the entire universe, a system with no confirmed biological components driving any of its feedback whatsoever, is proposing something considerably radical, using Gaia's basic logical structure as a template, while removing the one ingredient, actual confirmed biology, that made the original hypothesis even minimally plausible to begin with. 10 reasons the universe might, in some sense, be alive. A checklist for life that's blurrier than it looks. A cosmic web that measurably resembles a brain. Physics that builds order out of chaos the same way living things do. A universe that eats energy and exhales entropy like a body eats food and exhales heat. Black holes that might be giving birth to entire new universes. An information paradox objection that undercuts that whole idea. Consciousness that some physicists think might be built into matter itself. A version of that theory where the universe itself is the one mind. A standard model that has no room for any of it. And Gaia, the small, cautious idea this was all built on in the first place. Nobody has proven the universe is alive. Nobody has proven it isn't either. Some of the smartest people working on this today genuinely don't know. Subscribe to Cosmic Hives. See you in the next one.